communication issues, keeping it short, even with practice, we still struggle to having a relationship with someone we like, talking to people doesn't last that long, going on outings, sometimes alone, sure is upsetting, but I'm sure we're fine, talking to our friends, can have some issues, constantly asking the same questions to them. Who am I? I'm a human too. I'm just like you with ASD. Who am I? I'm a human too. I'm just like you with ASD.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Autism Stories, where we connect you with amazing people that help teens and adults with autism become more independent and successful. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. About 9 years ago, I became the facilitator of the adult support group for the Autism Society of Greater Cincinnati. It is there where I first started learning from adults on the spectrum on how to best support them. I realized from that point forward that I learned the most about autism from people with autism. So that is why it's really important for me to interview adults on the spectrum for autism stories and learn from them. And that starts with today's guest, Dr. Lamar Hardwick. In 2014, after years of struggling with social anxiety and sensory processing disorder and a host of other significant issues, Dr. Hardwick was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at the age of 36. Lamar is a pastor, husband, and father of 3 children. He holds a Master of Divinity from Emory University and a Doctorate of Ministry degree from Liberty University School of Divinity. Dr. Hardwick is also a popular online blogger and writer for several autism and disability websites. He provides autism educational workshops and consulting for churches, schools, and nonprofit organizations. He also provides mentoring services for teens and young adults on the autism spectrum. Dr. Hardwick is the author of 2 books, bestseller I Am Strong, The Life and Journey of an Autistic Pastor, and Epic Church, 5 Steps to Becoming the Church Jesus is Building. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Well, Lamar, I want to first thank you for joining us today. It's great to talk with you.
Thank you.
So, starting in 2006, you received your master's in pastoral care and counseling. What led you down this path in your life?
Well, I started that program at Emory in 2003, and that was a result of a few years earlier receiving what I felt like the call to ordain ministry. Mm-hmm. And so at the time, the denomination that I was with, as a part of the process, they encouraged you to get a Master of Divinity. And so I was always interested in pastoral care and counseling and, things like family systems theory. And so while matriculating through Emory, which is Campbell School of Theology at Emory, I decided to focus my studies on pastoral care and counseling.
You share something in common with many of our clients of Autism Personal Coach in the sense that you didn't get an autism diagnosis until adulthood. And then in 2014, at the age of 36, you were diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Can you talk to us a little bit about that journey?
Sure. I guess the first thing to say is that I always sort of knew there was some differences
Right.
Between me and other children. But I was born in 1978, so, right around the time where I would have been diagnosed around the age of 2 or 3. There really wasn't a lot of education about those on the spectrum who were verbal.
No, not at all.
And so, for lack of a better term, in those days, if you could talk, then you were just considered to be fine, and which I did okay. Another factor was that my father was in the military, so we moved quite a bit.
Mm.
And so some of the challenges that were visible were attributed to just the fact that we moved every 3 years. So socialization, those types of things that I struggle with were just attributed to the fact that it's very difficult for a child to adjust if they're constantly moving. I knew that was a struggle. My mom, after my diagnosis, as we were reflecting, did say, I think in 3rd grade, that she had one of my teachers say to her that Lamar is very smart, but there's something wrong with him and I can't figure it out. So there's always sort of this idea that there was just something a little bit different, but I seemed to do well academically. But I always heard certain terms and language from children and sometimes teachers about my lack of social awareness or social skills or all the types of things that we now know were factors that would have led to a diagnosis. Then fast forward, I really struggled through life, but I found some ways to mask and manage a lot of things. It wasn't until there was a transition in the church I am now. My predecessor resigned, and I had to take on a larger role in the church, primarily the adult service. At the time, I was the youth minister. And I often say, as a joke, but also seriously, that all the teenagers were socially awkward, so I didn't stick out as much because we were all very, teenagers are at that age.
Right.
But it wasn't until I had to spend more time in the adult service and around the adults where I started to hear the same language that I heard as a kid, except now it was coming from adults. So things like he walked past me, didn't speak, his facial expression, he didn't look very approachable, he looks mean. The highest contributing factor was while I was doing my doctorate, there's a class that we had to ask 7 people that were close to us or work with us to do an evaluation. And a colleague that I worked with at the time, who was sort of a mentor, wrote an evaluation on me, and I put in the evaluation, and I quote, Lamar has a hard time picking up on social cues. Lamar gets laser focused on one task at a time, and there was almost like a diagnosis. And I didn't know what social cues meant, honestly, and so I Googled it. And it just led me to read a lot of articles and listen to other adults who struggle with that, and found out that it was Asperger's, autism spectrum disorder. And I kind of researched it on my own for a year, took some online assessments, even though those are not designed to be diagnostic tools, but they continue to point to the fact that there's a higher percentage chance I'm on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So finally I went to my wife after about a year of kind of doing my own research and told her what I thought I was dealing with, and asked her to help me to find someone to diagnose me. And then that transition period before I became the pastor of my church, it was really difficult for me. I really struggled, and so it just kind of pushed me the direction of finally figure out why does it seem like the whole world is
Mm-hmm.
And that led to December 2014 getting an official diagnosis.
Were there any particular articles or things that you read that really jumped out at you that kind of led you to talk to your wife about this?
Really, I just started coming across YouTube videos of other adults.
Uh-huh.
People, I read a lot of adults. There weren't a lot of adults at that time, 4 years ago. On sites like the Mighty, the other internet sites that you would periodically hear or see something from an adult, and then listening to them tell their story, it sounded very similar. And then there was, I don't remember how, but I remember happening to run across an internet sort of assessment for people on the spectrum recognizing facial expressions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even remember what the website was, but there may have been 30 facial expressions. I think I got maybe 6 of them right. Which helped me to understand then why some of my coworkers and colleagues would say things like, aren't you excited? Don't you look excited? You should smile more. Me not realizing what other people's facial expressions meant. And so after that, it was just a matter of getting up the courage to tell my wife, I think this is what is going on. And I think I probably should go find someone to help me figure this out.
Mm-hmm. Now, often when adults get an autism diagnosis, then they think, now what? When they're at this point, like, do you have any advice to them?
Yeah, I think probably the first thing I would say is to kind of and this might not be the best term, but I had to learn to let myself off the hook. Just because there was sort of this immediate sense of guilt, I guess, as I replayed all of the relationships in my life that didn't work out, or that I didn't know why they ended, or why that person didn't talk to me anymore. And I sort of replayed all those and thought, okay, it was all my fault. If there's something I didn't see, something I said wrong, I read a situation wrong. Oftentimes I tend to just, say what I think, and sometimes that comes across wrong. So I think it was the biggest piece of advice I can get is to, try to work through that process of understanding that you don't have to put the pressure on yourself to think that it's necessarily your job to make everyone comfortable with you. Obviously, I learned some tips and some things. I continue to see my therapist for 2 years after she diagnosed me, and I learned helpful tips. But ultimately, just saying, when it comes down to it, I can't burden the responsibility of making sure that everybody's comfortable with me, because that's the burden that's just too big to carry. And I would encourage people to sort of relinquish that need to feel totally responsible for how others perceive you.
Right. That's great advice. Now, evidence suggests that people of color are often diagnosed with autism at later ages than Caucasian children and have less access to services. So, as part of being the founder of Autism Personal Coach, I want to be part of changing that. So what advice do you have to me and to those that run other organizations that provide services to those with autism, if they want to as well help to change that?
I think as I've been just doing my own research and learning, leading up to even after my diagnosis, I think one of the things that we have to, as a community, come to realize is that much of the criteria used to diagnose autism was developed
Right.
And so, from the get-go, while those things can be helpful, there are some, cultural differences, and even if you talk gender, some gender differences in how kids socialize or how they're taught to socialize.
Mm-hmm.
That if our basis for trying to determine criteria is only coming from one demographic, it becomes extremely difficult to use that same set of criteria to try to diagnose anyone that doesn't fit that demographic. So I think that's why a lot of oftentimes little things are missed. And then I think also it's perhaps giving, I wrote about this, giving voice to those like myself, platform. One of the things I work hard on now is there are a lot of major autism conferences and workshops that don't feature keynote speakers who are people of color, either individuals on spectrum or parents. And so I think that plays a lot into it as well, because we don't see ourselves represented in those circles.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, we still, as an African American community, we're still somewhat behind on being exposed to exactly what autism is and what it is.
Well, in my opinion, you should be keynoting many conferences throughout the country.
I'm working on that, and with others. It's I think that'll help a lot. It's just I get a lot of parents who either have now become comfortable with being public about their child being on the spectrum, or have read my story and discovered that my child's not just a troublemaker. He's not just lazy. He's not just defiant. That I see a lot of the things that I've had parents tell me. I see a lot of things that you write about and help me discover that.
Right.
I should probably look at this from a different perspective.
Right. And I've read a lot of your blog posts, and for those out there that haven't, I definitely recommend you Google some of Lamar's posts. I know one of your posts you talked about sensory overload, how that really affects you, and that certain environments in the community, such as concerts or amusement parks, sporting events, bowling alleys, church, and conferences are challenging for you. Is there a common theme for these environments that make them so overwhelming for you?
Interestingly enough, those are all things that I actually enjoy. And so I think reflecting on when I was a child, realizing why I struggled so much, either after being at those places past an extended amount of time or the day after. With me, it's usually I can be okay for up to 2 or 3 hours, and while I was a burnout, work my way up to 2 or 3 hours. It's usually the after effects. I compared to being concussed. It does something to your brain and body that it can physically and emotionally be very draining. I think the common denominator for those environments are usually, for me, it's high-pitched sounds, it's sudden changes in volume. For me, really, the best way I can describe it is anything that's not what I call organized noise.
Okay.
So I can deal with loud music. That's not the part of the concert that really bothers me. Is the clapping and screaming and yelling. That's, with music, it's organized. The rhythm works with the harmony. It goes in the same direction. I think that's why you find a lot of kids on the spectrum who like to put their headphones on and listen to music. It's organized. It's the unorganized noise, the sudden changes of pitch, tempo, loud noises, clapping really is one of those things. Loud screaming. Mm-hmm. Even in restaurants where everybody's talking at the same time, I often tell people in my church when they're talking in the lobby, it's not that I am not paying attention to you. The problem is I'm paying attention to everybody in pools and water parks because the ceilings are so high and everything's wide, and so just the water splashing down those types of things are a struggle for me as well.
So noises that are a surprise and are less predictable?
Yeah, less predictable, surprise, sudden changes, and again, just disorganized when you put all these different types of noises in one environment and they don't necessarily work together. It kind of, it's the best I can describe it. If you remember the old AOL, when you log on and it makes a noise, like a fax machine, it ends up sounding like that. So you can imagine that at the highest volume.
It was annoying at its volume.
Yeah, and so you can imagine that in your head. That's what everything sounds like when it's all coming at you, and you can't really distinguish anything, and it's just super annoying and draining. And it could sometimes push you over that edge.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't want to end the podcast without sharing information about the book you wrote about your life's journey. Can you tell everybody the name of that book, a little bit about it, and where they can purchase a copy?
Okay, so the book is entitled "I Am Strong: The Life and Journey of an Autistic Pastor." You can find that on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, basically anywhere that sells books online. The basic concept of the book is every chapter I kind of work through my childhood up to diagnosis, and then the later chapters sort of give some tips and tools about how I have learned to manage. I wrote it not very long after I was diagnosed, so a lot of it was just fresh, raw, authentic insight into, how I grew up, what I struggled with, how I discovered that I was on the spectrum, and what I'm doing now to try to help manage that.
When you got your diagnosis and the members of your church learned that you had autism, what was the feedback that you got from them?
It was very positive. I had told a few people, but before I went public with the congregation, when I did, it was very positive. Actually, kind of introduced them to it through a message series that I designed and preached of the same title as my book.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually did a video. Sometimes in our church, we will have people share a short story of something that they've overcome or something, just a great story. So I actually recorded my own, and that's when I told the congregation, and then I came out after the video and just shared a message with them, and it was a lot of tears, a lot of cheering, a lot of encouragement, which was good for me. I was a little bit nervous, but one of the main reasons why I shared that with people was because I didn't want anyone to come to my church and not have an interaction with me that they thought went positive, because a lot of times I never really know how people read me. But I didn't want someone to walk away feeling like they had a negative reaction to me over something that I can't necessarily control. And so I thought the best thing to do is just be honest and let people know, hey, if that ever happens, here's the reason why.
Right. And so not only are you a pastor, but you're a father and a husband. So this is a two-part question. So what aspects do you feel like of autism make being a father and a husband more challenging? And then on the other side, are there aspects of autism that make you a better father and husband?
Sure. I actually, a few years ago, wrote a blog, 5 Reasons Why Autism Makes Me an Awesome Dad, or something of that. So the challenges are, like most people, not all, but most people as simple as setting out to go to a store and changing the route or the routine or asking to stop somewhere that was not on the list of things that we said we were going to do. Those things are very challenging. So we found ways to work through that. On the other hand, sometimes things like that are a benefit, like particularly in raising our kids, because I'm the one who naturally is just more time conscious. I just have a clock. I know how long things take. I know how long it takes to get places, and so that's a benefit for our kids because it provides them with stability. They know Dad is always going to be on time to pick them up. They know Dad is going to be at every practice and every game. They know that their dad is steady, and so when you're raising young children, they need consistency, and so that has been a benefit for them. And the other thing I think I wrote about this is I think they've learned to be more thoughtful and reflective. They know that I'm a thinker. So I spend a lot of time reading, thinking, and processing. And while it's alone time, and sometimes it's time away from them, they see it as, okay, Dad is thinking. And so it's caused them to sort of slow down and be more thoughtful people, which I think is helpful for everyone.
Right, absolutely. So one of my favorite blog posts that was written was actually a letter that your wife wrote to you a year after you were diagnosed. Could you share what she wrote to you a year after your diagnosis?
Sure. So it says, Dear Lamar, I'm writing you this letter almost a year from the time that you were first diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. I just wanted to let you know how extremely proud I am of you as your wife. First, because you were brave enough to recognize you needed to get evaluated and seek a professional diagnosis when you knew certain things weren't quite adding up. So many are you to take that step, so I really applaud you. Secondly, I am inspired by how much work you're doing to learn about yourself. I heard you say in the interview on Autism Live that you have to learn who you are again at the age of 37. I can't imagine what that must be like. I applaud you for just having the courage to take that big step and embrace who you are, fearfully and wonderfully made, and being okay with who God created you to be and using all your God-given gifts and talents to learn more about the world you have become a part of. Your response is going to fill some big gaps, and you're already becoming such a huge voice for a platform that is oftentimes forgotten about and never talked about. I see all the work you're doing and how committed you are to autism spectrum disorder issues. Your work in the autism world is going to make huge footprints and lead the way for so many who are already a part of it or will become a part of it. One thing I realized when we started this journey is that I'm having to learn who you are all over again. I've known you for 18 plus years, and we have been married for 15 years in January next year. This was written a few years ago. While your diagnosis does mean having to learn a new you, I'm still googly-eyed over it. Some would question me and say, well, aren't you concerned this isn't the same man you married? And I would say, no, this is exactly the man I married. We have just arrived at a point in our life where layers are being peeled off and growth is taking place. Our package comes with A and B as a part of that growth, and I'm okay with that. As a matter of fact, this helped to answer some questions I used to have and were put in the Lamar is so weird category. Now with the help of therapy books and you teaching me more about who you are, I'm able to understand the weird. And believe it or not, it's teaching me so many things about myself as well. It's a challenge, yes, but it's also helping me to grow. I especially liked how in one of your articles you talked about just seeing or recognizing that a coin has two sides and having the ability to see the other perspective. That was really an eye-opener for me because I think we say this all the time about so many things, but in reality, living it can be hard because we're always thinking that only our perspective is the right one. I have to confess I am not always right and you are weird. We're just wired differently. I know we complement each other well as we continue on the journey, and it can only get better. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think to myself, wow, when I was doing this or when I was responding like that to Lamar, I had no idea how much I was stretching you beyond your comfort zone. I want you to know I'm really sorry from the bottom of my heart. I read and reread your articles you've written for the mighty. I sometimes think about encounters we had, and it makes me realize how small I really was in some of those situations. I want you to know my ignorance to you being on spectrum is an excuse, but your confirmed diagnosis has permanently removed all my ignorance. And it's teaching me so many ways that I can find the right balance in making your journey and our journey together everything I believe God intended for it to be. I love you so much, and my life would not be the same if you weren't part of it.
Wow, that's beautiful. And what was your reaction to her writing that letter?
Obviously, it was a lot of encouragement. The first year of the diagnosis was it was a relief and sort of a burden at the same time. Simply because you get a diagnosis, you finally have a name for the differences that you always felt, but then there's this burden of thinking that I need to change, or that there's something that I should do to control this, or how do I take responsibility for some of those things? And just getting that letter just reminded me that while there are lots of things that I could work on, that she still really appreciates me for who I am, and even make the effort to understand me better enough to know that there's some things that we could do differently on both sides to make our marriage work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely agree with her in the sense that you do have a very powerful voice, and it was a privilege for me to get a chance to talk with you today. Thanks a lot for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today, and we wish everyone out there a very happy holiday season. We know the holidays can be tough for many on the spectrum, and we are there to help. Autism Personal Coach is a unique service in that we help individuals with autism by working on meaningful, individualized goals in the setting in which they will be used, so your anxiety is greatly reduced, and as a result, you can become more independent and successful. To get an autism coach for a loved one or yourself, it's very easy. All you have to do is email Autism Personal Coach or call 216-336-5889 and request a coach today. On next week's episode of Autism Stories, we will talk with Haley Moss, the author of A Freshman Survival Guide for College Students with Autism Spectrum Disorders. Talk to you then.